Good morning on this Sunday, November 12th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Fulton County elections workers are on high alert following the report of a new threat. A new AJC presidential race poll is out, and Georgia legislators move to cut government regulations on business and give lawmakers more power over state agencies. Phil, Kathy, Alicia, and Brian are here today. I'm Deidre Dukes and for Lori Geary. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Georgia election officials are once again in the national spotlight. Georgia's Secretary of State has sent out an alert to all counties that someone had mailed a fentanyl-laced envelope to a Fulton County elections worker. Secretary Brad Raffensperger calls the act domestic terrorism, and he vows that state and postal officials will track down the sender.
This is very, very serious.
Election workers are on edge after learning a fentanyl letter that tested positive for the illegal drug is on its way to Fulton County. Elections officials got word Wednesday and have tried to track the drug-laced letter down before anyone comes in contact with it.
It was really yesterday that we became aware of the situation, that there's actually still an envelope that was traveling, in the mail and headed towards Fulton County.
The Fulton County letter that is still in transit has already been tested and is likely from the same source that sent 4 similar letters to Washington State. Georgia's top elections chief says this type of behavior must be denounced.
This is domestic terrorism, and it needs to be condemned by anyone that holds elected office and anyone that wants to hold elected office anywhere in America.
And the Secretary of State said his office notified election officials in all 159 counties and armed those officials in Fulton with Narcan to neutralize the drug. And Phil, some alarming news that we've also received. More than a dozen letters have been mailed to multiple election offices across the country.
Well, it's very upsetting, and obviously we would condemn this. And we were just talking before the show that sadly, on the political left, the right, in the middle, there's some crazies out there, and we just have to be vigilant.
Yeah, and this has got to be incredibly stressful, Kathy, for everyone involved, especially elections workers who are still feeling the frustration, and in some cases still the fear from the 2020 Georgia elections.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, they have not identified who has done this. They've identified that it's been done, and the U.S. Postal Service is looking for the letters, but they have not been received at Fulton County. And the Fulton County election workers are in the process of getting ready to do a recount so that they can certify next week. So these things are incredibly stressful, but also disruptive, as they're meant to be.
Yeah, and Brian, we also learned this week that it's not only Georgia elections officials and workers who've been targeted, but also Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, we learned just yesterday, was in fact threatened.
Well, and those were some seriously personal and violent threats that came in. And let us not forget, Deidre, that earlier in the week, Congressman Rich McCormick from the 6th District had to close down his district office because of terroristic threats made against his workers there. So they're having to work remotely at this point in time. These workers are folks who aren't necessarily high-paid public servants. They are people who go to work every day trying to serve the people of Georgia. And this is just an added stress that we don't need right now. But I do think that this isn't Georgia-specific. This is something that's a tense moment in America. This stuff going on with the elections workers, that's not just in Georgia. That's going out around the country. They've already been delivered in Washington State, on the far side of the country. So we've got a national problem on our hands, and it's hard to believe that we're going to get through it all without something really terrible happening.
And Alicia, really these threats come ironically even as Georgia had some successful elections on Tuesday. No reports of major problems.
Absolutely, which tells you that this was not about the local election happening in Georgia. It's probably linked to some other national people who are probably making incendiary remarks and stoking some of this. And so I appreciate our Secretary of State being very clear and very strong, and I think we need to join in that chorus in repudiating this kind of behavior, condemn it, stand up as a candidate, as an elected official, and say this is wrong. This is domestic terrorism. I take this very seriously. This is literally life or death. Someone can easily touch one of these envelopes and die. And so I am deeply concerned about this. Happy to see that Fulton County is working alongside the Secretary of State. This is not about partisanship. This is literally life and death, and we have to take this seriously.
Well, can I just jump in here? It is about partisanship in some ways, because elected officials, including Raffensperger, over the last couple of years, continue to sort of make Fulton County the whipping post of elections, even though most of those allegations, if not all of them, have just not turned out to be true. And I think we all have to be a little bit more careful when we use politics to denigrate people just to gain some extra points, because people who are unstable, kind of take that as their green light to go ahead and do something disruptive.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. And when I say it's not a partisan issue, I mean protecting life, right? When you are putting mechanisms in place from a safety and security standpoint, that part is what I mean. It's not about partisanship. But I absolutely agree that many of these attacks we've seen on Fulton County and other places, I think are largely coming from one side. People, and I don't know this, it hasn't been completely investigated, but I think we can probably get to the place where we can all agree that some of this has to do with the 2020 election. There are lots of people.
I thought
I don't know that, and I said that the investigation will continue. But we have not seen these kinds of attacks since the 2020 election. We have not seen a former president try to overturn an election. We have not seen a former president with 91
You've not
indictments.
seen the left talking about destroy
those are the
system.
things that are the foundation of these kinds of attacks.
The left
period.
preaches all the time, destroy the system, we're against it, the anarchists are allied with the left. You're forgetting all of that. Let's just
I'm not
balance
forgetting,
it.
but
I'm totally
the
on the
tactics
left,
are
and
different.
I've never said that one time.
Thank you.
Well,
I mean,
good.
I think
let's
that's
not forget,
ridiculous.
just in our own state, we have 2 Republican congressmen who've been targeted for violence right now. We don't know where those threats are coming from necessarily in the McCormick case, but we do see Republicans being targeted as well. And I will say, I've got to respond to you, Kathy, on Raffensperger.
Sure.
His credibility has been tested on a national stage. I would trust him in what he says.
Well, I know a little bit more behind the scenes
I'm
about some
sure
of the
you
things
do.
that happen in that
But I
office
trust
as
him.
it gets done.
I trust him.
Well, I think when he is good, he can be very, very good, and when he's bad, he might be my loser of the week.
And we're going to leave it right there. We'll get to winners and losers here in a bit. But we want to move on to the 2024 presidential election, which is still a year out. But there's been a lot of buzz this week about polling numbers. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution just released a poll that shows President Joe Biden has lost ground over the last 3 years after a Democratic victory in 2020 and is currently polling neck and neck with President Trump in Georgia. So, Alicia, the polling results show Georgia does remain a closely divided state.
It does, and it is perplexing that Republicans are still supporting a former president, now candidate, who has 91 indictments against him. But it is where we are. I'm actually hopeful about that polling because it is neck and neck in Georgia. And there are some other polls that suggest things differently, but I think it's a good thing that President Biden is doing as well as he is. They both have an equal number of unfavorability, I think, on both sides. And so it's going to be an interesting race, but I'm excited about what I'm seeing across the country. Obviously, the wins that we saw this past Tuesday, there's a lot to be said about that. And I'm excited about having a president in the White House again who is mature, who is an adult, who will bring this country together and who will make sure that we're safe.
And Brian, let's talk about those legal woes because Georgian voters were polled on that. And it does look like that could be problematic for Trump should he be the GOP nominee.
I totally disagree. And I do love your code word mature for really, really old. And part of the problem.
It means being able to have an adult conversation and act with wisdom.
Americans
That's what I mean by
Americans
mature.
don't believe that he can have an adult conversation. They're very concerned about his mental capacity. And we're seeing it in these polls. We're seeing it in focus groups.
And more concerned about
We're
Trump.
seeing it. Well, no, not necessarily. In Georgia, you break into these polls, Georgians believe that they're worse off today than they were under President Trump, and they blame Joe Biden for the change in their circumstances. His ratings on the economy are terrible. And if Americans feel the way today, Georgians particularly, next year, then Joe Biden's going to lose Georgia. Americans at large, but Georgians as well, believe Joe Biden is too old. They're very concerned about him carrying on into his mid to late 80s when he's already shuffling around and looks asleep a lot of the time. Look, and this just isn't me being mean. I mean, we are seeing this in the data. This is what Americans are saying. This is what Democrats are saying. And, one thing that I have a problem with this poll is I think Trump's lead here right now is bigger than what that poll shows. The New York Times had it way bigger. But look, Republicans cannot rest on their laurels. The economy had a 4.9% growth in the last quarter. If that catches up in the next year and people begin to feel it, we've got a fight on our hands. Republicans have got to be ready to go out there and fight and win.
And Kathy, there is some concern, I would imagine, from Biden's camp, looking at the opinions of a lot of the independent voters. That number concerningly low for Biden this go-round.
Well, it is now, but independent voters tend to wait to the last minute to make up their minds, and so those voters, those swing voters in a state that's as close as this, are going to be key, right? And then turnout is going to be key. You want to make sure that young people who kind of come and go in the elections are actually going to get out, and folks who might be disaffected on one issue or the other. What I think this poll shows is that we're a year out from an election, and we're exactly where we were, a year out last election, where people, we're a split state, people don't know, and my goodness, what treacherous territory we have between now and next November for our country, for our world, and how things turn out. I'm going to have to be with Alicia, well, no surprise on this one, and that is, that this is a government with a steady hand. I wish Biden was younger, but he's not. But what he does bring is experience, and he brings a government staffed by people who are willing to make educated, smart decisions on behalf of the citizens in the United States. And we didn't see that under Donald Trump, and I think people know it.
And we're going to have to make that the last word.
We have
12 months. We actually don't have time. I've got to toss the break.
On the Biden
Up next,
administration.
Tuesday's national election results and implications for Georgia in 2024. We'll discuss.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
It was a good night for incumbents in Georgia and across the country, with many winning re-election Tuesday. Democrats won key races in Kentucky and Ohio voters approved a constitutional amendment on Tuesday that ensures access to abortion and other forms of reproductive health care. So, Alicia, while President Biden is struggling in the polls, Democrats are encouraged by their performance on Tuesday.
Yes, I think it shows us a few things. And again, I want to say I think President Biden is going to do just fine. But it shows us that Democrats can actually win in red states, and yes, incumbents in particular. But it also talks to Democrats, and I think that's the message for Democrats, that we need to make sure we've got the right messaging, we've got the right candidates. I think this whole choice issue is an important one. We saw in the AJC poll that it's pretty high up there in terms of issues of importance for people across party lines. And that was actually a little bit surprising to me. But it's bearing out in all of these elections across the country. And so I will also say that in Georgia, there were a number of incumbents that won. And I think that's pretty typical, right? And I will take this personal second and say congratulations to Rochelle Robinson, the mayor of Douglasville, who also won her re-election. But there are a number of people who won their elections, and I think at the end of the day, I'm excited for Democrats about the possibilities. We're winning, got the legislature in Virginia, and so the winning will continue throughout the rest of this election season.
I felt during the GOP presidential debate on Wednesday, the Republican candidates were asked about this Tuesday turnout, the outcome, and the Democrats doing as well as they did. And they said that they were surprised and a bit concerned about that.
Well, I think all of us know this. We've watched a lot of election cycles, and it's very different electorate when you have an off-year presidential election in terms of a presidential election year. So I was looking at some numbers. A lot of the MAGA Trump voters didn't turn out because they just love their man. They're going to turn out in 2024, but they don't care about some of these races. Some of these are disaffected people. They're blue-collar workers that really don't like either party but like Trump. And the independents, like Kathy is saying, the independent vote for Biden has been hemorrhaging ever since he took the oath of office. And I think that trend is going to continue with the economy sadly worsening. And I think that I will agree that messaging is very important in any election, obviously. And I think the Republicans have to get it right. Trump said it best, and he was trying to advise Republicans on abortion. Don't use the word ban. That's crazy. It's all 50 states now that have to agree on what's going to happen with abortion, what is going to be the timeline for it. And there has to be exceptions. Donald Trump said that, for example, rape, incest, or if the life of the mother is in danger. So the Republicans have to do a 50-state get the abortion message right. But I think it's going to be the economy. I think it's going to be all of the wars that America have gotten into under Biden. And, of course, raging inflation.
What implications might Tuesday's outcome have for Georgia elections?
Well, I think I think it's a positive development. I think just to touch on the abortion issue again, I think it's important to say that in states where you wouldn't necessarily think there would be a win on a constitutional amendment on this issue, that you had one in Ohio, or that you had the House flip in Virginia. I mean, I think those are big things that foretell what might happen here in this state. But I also think that we have to be really clear that the big numbers about the economy are that the economy is doing well. We've got a lot of recovery because of the money we released into the atmosphere during COVID, and well, we should have, but you've got to, there's always repercussions to big actions like that you take. So we'll see how it develops along. But I want to say one more thing. Republicans have been restricting the personal freedom of people for years, under abortion, under the rights of parents to determine if their kids think they're transgender or they are transgender, to have the medical care that they want to have, and other kinds of things. And so as you start picking away at women, at parents, what kind of books people can read in the library, folks are going to be thinking at the back of their mind, especially if they're independent, I don't want to live in this kind of world.
Yeah. Brian, you're over here.
Right.
I can just feel it coming up.
I was steaming a little bit about that, coming from the party that doesn't want parents to be able to be empowered to send their kids to the school that's the best fit for them, something that Alicia and I have in common. The party that is the speech police, that sets up these moral codes of what can and can't be said and then cancels if you violate these arbitrary standards. Look, Republicans should be a little concerned about what happened on Tuesday. It shows that the floor is not falling out for Democrats in a way that it should be in this political environment where people are, as Phil said, concerned about inflation. They are worried about the cost of living and wages not keeping up. That should have been an anti-incumbent backlash, and we didn't see it. But we're going into 2024 with a really tight race here in Georgia, and I think, ironically, both parties are going to go on to nominate the nominees who are the least likely to win. I think if Republicans nominate anybody else, they're going to win Georgia. And I think if Democrats nominate anybody else, they're going to win Georgia. The two weakest candidates are the ones that are going to be on the ballot next year. Americans have said, by majorities, we don't want either one of them.
We'll leave it right there. Coming up, Georgia's lieutenant governor wants to reduce the size and scope of state government. We'll discuss his red tape rollback initiative when we return.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
A voter survey of Georgia Latinos is offering new insight into issues of importance to their community. The Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials released their findings, which revealed what Georgia's Latino voters care most about. And Alicia, the polling offers great insight for candidates ahead of the upcoming election.
Yeah, there were a couple of things that were very striking to me about this poll. One of them is that many of those respondents said they had never been asked political questions before, which really speaks to the fact that we've really left out the Latino community in these conversations and in our election process, and that's a problem. What was not a surprise is that it turns out our Hispanic members of our community are just like all of us. They care about the economy and jobs. They care about healthcare and making sure that they can provide for their families. And so the message, I think, to both parties is here are hundreds of thousands of people, right, who have not been talked to, who deserve some attention. And I'm excited to see this kind of polling. What I'll say to my party is that clearly these are the folks who align with what we believe in. And so it's up to us to make sure that we speak to them, speak to the issues that matter to them, and include them in this process.
Yeah, and Brian, those kitchen table issues really important to Latino voters who were polled, as well as immigration issues.
Well, one thing I've found really interesting is that if you look at working class Latinos, their views on the issues are very similar to working class white people. You see a migration toward President Trump amongst these voter groups. Their views on the southern border and keeping it secure, their views on inflation and job creation, and feeling like Biden hasn't helped them on those things, very similar to what you're going to see in a white group of voters. So this is 4% of Georgia's electorate now, and it's a growing electorate. Many who are here aren't voters yet, but will be at some juncture. So this is a group that's gone from over 60% Democrat to 50-50. It's a real opportunity for Georgia Republicans.
Yeah, and Kathy, Latino leaders say this is also a real opportunity for lawmakers on both sides to really connect and make contact with the Latino community.
Yeah, I think it gives people a real roadmap for the kind of issues they need to be paying attention to. And I think, at the sort of the fourth issue here was healthcare. And, we haven't really discussed the utter failure of the Kemp administration to enact his Medicaid expansion program. And only like 2,000 people have signed up, but tens of thousands.
It just started.
They're going to do like 11,000 people a day to meet their goals. So
You'll always
they're not
be against Kemp.
Well, I'm always going to be for Medicaid expansion for whoever we're talking about. And so I think, when you start digging into these things and people start, pointing out who's kind of applying the pressure and who's not doing their job, I think Democrats have a great story to tell, and we'll be telling it.
All right, we're going to move from studies to law and order for a minute. Hot topic here. In about 2 weeks, the Fulton County jury on the Young Slime Life gang and racketeering trial will begin hearing the case. On Thursday, we learned that some of the evidence they could hear are the defendant's own rap lyrics. The Fulton County Chief Superior Court Judge Earl Glanville ruled 17 sets of rap lyrics can be used as evidence in the Young Slime Life RICO trial. Now, the 6 defendants are accused of a long list of violent crimes, including murder. And Phil, the ruling has major implications not only for this trial, but for future cases where an artist's work, their words could be used to build a case against them.
Well, that's right, and I'm glad that Judge Glanville ruled in favor of using some of these lyrics, because Young Thug is the leader of a gang that's done tremendous damage in terms of crime in Atlanta over the years, and he and his co-defendants glory in this. It's not rap culture, it's gang culture, and that's what the prosecutor pointed out. For instance, the lyrics that Young Thug loves, obviously is excited about, is he's a gang leader who orders people being killed. He obviously hates women, glorifies rape, hates white people. All these lyrics show state of mind and motive.
Of course, Kathy, there would be the argument on the other side that this really is an issue of First Amendment rights, freedom of speech. And I know we're focusing on rap lyrics, but really you could look at any genre. And sometimes the music is dark and it can be distasteful to some. But at the end of the day, is it freedom of speech?
Well, that's always been a razor edge that our country has had to face. I think the judge in this case has limited it to 17 sets of lyrics, and if they want to introduce more sets, they're going to have to sort of uphold a standard. This will play out, and it'll give us some interesting discussion over time about how this gets used. But I think in this particular instance, if they can kind of sort of attach timing and intent to the lyrics and the crimes that happen, they may have a story to tell.
Yeah, and Brian, listening to the arguments on both sides in court, really strong arguments on both sides as to whether or not this should be submitted as evidence.
Well, if there is a rap song that closely aligns with the sequencing of actual crime that happened in Atlanta, suspected to be done by the guy singing the song, I think that can be seen as an admission of guilt. If the details seem to align just a little bit too closely, I think it tells the jury what they need to know. I'm all about the First Amendment. I'm all about people having the right to say things that I find offensive and reprehensible. But if you commit a crime and then admit to it, I don't care if there's music in the background or not.
And very quickly, turning back to state government, Georgia Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones wants to cut government regulations on businesses. It's called the Red Tape Rollback Initiative. And Phil, very briefly, if you just talk about what that is, the proposal.
Right. I think that, especially if you're in business, everybody's in favor of regulation, but not over-regulation. And this is what it's all about. We need to trim back on licenses. There's obviously duplication in government, and I think all of us should be in favor of consolidating that when it comes to issuing licenses. And I think just reviewing the whole set of regulations that we have to try to cut red tape to help small business.
Yeah, making it better for small business is what it's all about. All right, thank you. Coming up, winners and losers.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
And Kathy, we'll start with you, your winner and losers.
Okay, well, there's a big fight brewing over transit on the Beltline here in Atlanta, and I know that's not of interest to everybody in the state of Georgia, but in Metro Atlanta, it's a big deal. I just want to commend Nathan Davenport for a really good YouTube video on why we should have transit on the Beltline. This is a topic of interest. I hope you check it out.
All right, Phil.
You know, Saturday yesterday was Veterans Day, so I want to salute all of our veterans, and of course it's Military Families Month, and I want to salute all of them. They don't get the attention that they deserve, in my opinion, and I think there's a lot of services available, especially to our veterans. Shockingly, about a third of them are homeless, and they have drug problems and other problems. I would suggest go to va.org to see the services available, and then over in Augusta, you know, Georgia's second largest city, it's a winner. They had a vote the other day. They deserve a new Coliseum, and they voted yes, so that'll be good.
Oh, good for them. All right, Alicia.
I want to echo Phil and say thank you to all of our veterans, including my husband, Carlos Cersei, who is a veteran and a former state trooper, retired state trooper. I also have another winner, James White III, who was sworn in as an Assistant Solicitor General in the office of Fulton County Solicitor Keith Gamage. So this is a story of a man who had a past, and so he's gone from prison to prosecutor. And I love this story. I love that Keith Gamage gave him a chance, and I love the redemption story here, so congrats to him.
All righty, and Brian.
My winners, really quickly, the Isaacson Symposium at UGA about civility and politics, inaugural meeting this on Friday. Nathan Dill was given a knighthood by the Emperor of Japan. That announcement came out. That's pretty cool. So he's a winner. Zoo Atlanta, the only pandas left in America. The Chinese took the rest of them as they're sending us fentanyl. And happy Veterans Day.
All righty, thanks for joining us.